now be recorded.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to the first episode of the Digital Law Podcast for 2025. We're here already, you know. So this is a podcast brought to you by Digital Law and produced by Anson Evaluate. As a bit of background, we at Digital Law are a niche law firm specialising in working solely in the technology and cybersecurity law sector. In each episode, we look at the recent stories in the news related to digital technology around the world, with a specific emphasis on data protection. For more information on the stories we're covering this week, please check the links in our show notes. By way of an introduction, I'm Amelia Davies, an apprentice solicitor at Digital Law UK, and I'm joined by Peter Wright. And after Peter's introduced himself, we will dive right into today.
Hello, everyone. My name's Peter. I'm a solicitor and the managing director at Digital Law. And we've jumped straight in with a sort of news update for you again with this episode. We may get round to perhaps looking at some predictions for this year at some point in another episode, but there's been a surprising amount of things going on, so we thought it was worth just jumping into some of the headlines and some of the interesting stories at the moment and taking it from there. So I will pass back to Amelia to kick us off.
Thanks, Peter. So today we are going to be covering the Chinese app RedNote, Apple to pay $77 million after Siri eavesdropping, the Google competition investigation, the health workers targeted by cyber attack, and Action Fraud's fraud alert. But before we dive into today's stories, here is some background information on our podcast producer, Anson Evaluate. So Anson Evaluate are a consultancy company offering a variety of services, including data protection training, outsourced data protection officer services, and specialising in advising clients over multiple jurisdictions. So, kicking off with our first story, the Chinese app RedNote. So TikTok users in the US are migrating to a Chinese app called RedNote, following the threat of the ban on the 19th of January. So just to confirm, this podcast is being recorded just before the ban, and maybe next week we'll be able to record one after the ban.
It's going to age very quickly, isn't it?
Indeed, yeah. So the move by users who call themselves TikTok refugees has made RedNote the most downloaded app on Apple's US App Store on Monday. So RedNote is a TikTok competitor popular with young people in China, Taiwan, and other Mandarin-speaking populations. It has about 300 million monthly users and looks like a combination of TikTok and Instagram. It allows users, mostly urban women, to exchange lifestyle tips from dating and fashion. So it's quite an interesting one, particularly given the fact that, TikTok is Chinese-based, ByteDance rather, and the kind of issue and the reason it's being banned in the US is because it's Chinese-based. So it's sort of out of the frying pan into the frying pan here.
Yes, and you do have to ask the question. I mean, the reason people are jumping onto this is that the legislation banning TikTok is quite specific. So therefore, by jumping to RedNote, otherwise known as Little Red Book, draw your own conclusions from that. The makers of it say it's nothing at all to do with Chairman Mao and the Red Book, but Chinese app called Little Red Book. Well, as I say, draw your own conclusions. But the point here is that, users are saying, well, we'll go to this. And if the US government did want to then take action against it, they'd have to then get a piece of legislation, get it through Congress. And given it takes an enormous amount of time and bullying to get anything through Congress, then it wouldn't be an easy thing, and it would take certainly months, if not years, for any ban to come through. Indeed, it's taken long enough for this one to come through. It was almost a year ago, I think, that over a year ago, I think that the piece of legislation that led to this impending ban on the 19th of January was passed, because there's always a sunset period that then follows, and of course that ignores the months and years it took to get that thing drafted, get it through Congress in the first place. But we have this impending ban on TikTok. It is interesting where this story has moved, I think, because we've covered it quite a bit over the course of the last 12 months. So to save anyone the joy of having to listen to our previous episodes on this, in short, ByteDance was trying to argue that, look, we're a US corporation and we're a majority US owned in terms of where our shareholders are, and we've got a majority US board. We aren't an arm of the Chinese state. All of those protestations didn't make any difference when the CEO ByteDance Suzy Chu appeared before Congress in the state. Didn't make any difference. They then tried to fight this ban going through the courts. The courts have refused to overturn the ban. I think it even went as far as the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court have said, no, we don't agree with the arguments being made by ByteDance. We are supporting the legislation. So then we're sort of towards the end game now. 19th of January, in theory, is the day upon which you would have to have TikTok withdrawn from the app stores.
So that was what I was just about to get onto, Peter. So what does actually a ban look like? And so you just started mentioning here that it'd be removed from app stores. But
yes.
What does that mean? Because surely if someone's already got the app on their phone, it means they can just continue using TikTok as normal.
Got it in one. Yes, you would indeed be able to carry on using TikTok, but you would be affected. The issue here is that most apps require updates to be installed for security reasons, as well as patches. And this is always an ongoing iterative process. Anyone who has, for example, the Signal app will know, particularly the desktop version, requires you to close and open the app repeatedly so that new updates can be installed, largely because they're always expanding on the functionality of the app. So it's always, the update will cure this bug and add this function and allow you to do this. So some updates are bigger than others. But the point is that if you are not able to receive those updates and patches, the app starts to progressively run less and less smoothly until you get to a point where you can no longer use it at all. This could take a process of many weeks or perhaps even months. But bear in mind the complexity of an app like TikTok. We're talking about something that is recording video and sound and has a huge number of users globally, has a vast amount of data, has very sophisticated algorithms. Those algorithms will always be evolving and developing and changing over time. So we're talking about a piece of technology that is very sophisticated anyway and is evolving exponentially. So as was the case in India, where TikTok was banned quite a few years ago now, certainly before the pandemic, users in India are not able to download the app, and long ago, any user who had it will have no longer been able to use it. And bear in mind as well that the average smartphone lasts for what, 2.5 years?
Yeah, that's probably about right.
So,
unless you're on kind of Apple, in which case it's about a year. But
we all
know about that.
Yeah, allegedly. I mean, the thing is that these things are made to be. They're made so that you can't repair them. They're made so that you can't update them. So you end up sort of throwing away an incredibly expensive piece of kit in terms of your phone handset every 2 to 3 years. So within that time, it'll just get to the point that when you'd automatically want to download the app on your new phone, it won't be there to allow you to do that. So that's how this ban would work. We should add, therefore, that cut-off date is the 19th. However, a 6-month extension to that can be granted if it turns out that a sale of TikTok, a divest of their US interests and US users, is possible. Now, TikTok have always said we cannot sell off the US part of the app. It's not made so that they can sort of say, right, here's 160 million US users, we're hiving that off into a separate company. The technology will simply not allow them to do that.
Yeah.
Second thing is that the Chinese state has said, we will not allow the algorithm to be sold. It cannot go off to a corporation outside of China. So that presents an interesting quandary. There have been reports that ByteDance is looking to sell TikTok to one Elon Musk. If they were to do that, that seemed to be talking about not just the sale of the US operations, but the sale of TikTok, the platform, full stop. Potentially, you can see a deal landing whereby Musk would set up a corporation in China. He could then say, I own this, not the Chinese state. I'm Mr. Free Speech. I will not allow any interference on this platform from the Chinese state, blah, blah, blah.
I mean, you can see it happening within reason.
Exactly. He's already, changed. It's clearly he runs X very much in the way that he wants to. So you can imagine him doing the same thing with TikTok. And then the Chinese could go, well, that's fine. You've set up TikTok as a wholly owned, you own it, but it's based in China. That satisfies our need for the algorithm not to leave China.
Yeah.
And so you could see that sort of landing space there for a compromise on this. And also, don't forget that Elon Musk does go across to China quite regularly. He has Tesla factories. The largest Tesla factory in the world is in China. A lot of the supply chain for SpaceX and Tesla comes from China. A lot of those rare earth minerals and expertise and stuff is all coming from being manufactured in China as well, because it's cheap compared to having it manufactured in Texas. So there's that sort of issue as well. He seems to be recognized and liked by the Chinese leadership. Interestingly, Elon Musk does not criticize the Chinese government. He criticizes lots of other governments. I'm not saying anything controversial there, I don't think. Just look at his feed on Twitter. Look at what he said within the last 24 hours. And I'm not saying that, look at what he said in the last 24 hours on the 16th of January. I'm saying in any given 24 hours, seemingly he will express some fairly forthright views, never about China. So I'll just park that there, go and draw your own conclusions. But as I say, you could see a landing area where that could lead to a resolution of this. However, ByteDance has turned around and said there's nothing in these rumors. We aren't looking to sell it to TikTok. We aren't looking to sell TikTok at all. But you can see at the 11th hour they might go say, well, yeah, we are looking at selling it, and that would then give them that extra window of 6 months. Don't forget that then means that gets them past the 19th of January. What happens on the 20th of January?
We've got Trump's inauguration.
President Trump, and of course, he has talked about saying, I will save TikTok. Whether he will or not, or that may have just been something he said on the spur of the moment while he was campaigning. Who are we to
because that's anyone's guess there.
Hypothesize on that, given that in his first term he did try to ban TikTok via executive order, which they then challenged. So, what would he actually do? We don't know. No one knows what he's going to do from the 20th of January. But, who knows? I think there's no point even wasting the breath on speculating there, to be perfectly honest.
Well, hopefully in our next episode, we'll be able to maybe revisit this and have a comparison between this was before and this was after.
Gift that keeps on giving. We'll be
back.
It
is. Next, we're going to another heavy hitter here. We're looking at Apple. So Apple had to pay $77 million after a Siri eavesdropping case. So Apple has agreed to pay $95 million, so roughly £77 million, to settle a lawsuit in the US that accuses the firm of adapting Siri, its virtual assistant, to eavesdrop on people using its devices. So it agreed to pay out after a proposed class action lawsuit claimed that the voice-activated assistant violated users' privacy. Apple denied wrongdoing in agreeing to settle, and class members, which are estimated to be tens of millions, may get up to about $20 for each Siri-enabled device, such as iPhone, Apple Watch, or as a result of the action. So the proposed settlement filed in the federal court in Oakland, California, will resolve a 5-year-old lawsuit revolving around the allegations. It's quite interesting here because this isn't the first time that we've actually heard of Internet of Things eavesdropping. I mean, I won't name any names, but there's certainly an Amazon device that's been accused of doing so before.
Indeed, it's how these things operate. They have to listen.
And then all of a sudden, you've been talking about buying a new pair of jeans, and lo and behold, you've got ads for jeans.
Yes. So we know that happens. I mean,
Absolutely.
And that's just it. And it's interesting here that rather than have any form of court hearing where evidence would have to come out on exactly what Apple does or does not do, far easier just to pay them off.
Exactly. And £77 million, drop it in the ocean for a massive corporate company like Apple.
So you and I were talking earlier on how much of a drop in the ocean? Let's break out the book of metaphors. Is this the loose change down the back of the sofa? How insignificant amount is? I mean, 77 million to the average company would be would be huge. However, let's have a look at, Apple's market capitalization, the value of Apple's shares as traded. An Apple share is currently worth $230. That means the market capitalization of Apple is 3.4 trillion US dollars. When you're worth $3.4 trillion, what does that make the $77 million?
My math is not great, but certainly not a lot in the grand scheme of things.
It's probably smaller than the bronze change that we have here in the UK. Your 1 and 2 pence piece in comparison for Apple. It is so tiny that they really have got away with it. I mean, just look at that figure. It just shows how the majority of regulatory fines and enforcement that these corporations face is really as water off a duck's back, given the sheer scale of them. So, in this instance, you get rid of an expensive ongoing piece of litigation. Clearly, the damage there was the risk of having to discuss how you collect and use data in a public forum like a court and issuing, this is how we do it, this is how it happens, and this is how someone saying something is picked up by Siri and then it's manifested that, oh, here's the advert.
And then you've got the incredible level of scrutiny that's going to be taking place, and then you've got the public court of opinion.
Yeah. And in this instance, it's 77 million. It will be split across the way that these US class actions work. So you don't have to have, they'll have a cohort, a group of people who would have been involved in bringing that litigation. But basically, because it's a class, it then means that, anyone who is affected by, in this instance, they will define a range of devices and apps to say, anyone who used this between these timeframes is eligible to claim. And they'll then be able to go along and claim. But already, it is estimated that probably less than 10% of the people in the class who could claim will actually claim. Also, from that 77 million, don't forget, I'm afraid, as is usually the case, the lawyers' costs have to come out of that, and they think the lawyers' costs are probably about $25 million as well, plus probably about $1 million on disbursements and other fees. So you can see that of that 77 million, it's more like about 50 that's going to form the pot that could then be claimed from. And then given the vast potential cohort of people who could claim, you're looking at probably, yes, between $10 and $20 per user. So have Apple got off lightly there? Yes, incredibly so. They have got absolutely everything they wanted. Regrettably, even the claimants who had brought this litigation, their lawyers will be sat there rubbing their hands going, yeah, we'll have tens of millions in fees for this. Great, wonderful. Indeed, it's the risk of those fees not being paid that will probably mean that the claimants have indeed settled rather than look to carry on. Plus, they've probably been engaged in this litigation for years anyway, and they get to the point where you're like, I'm worn down. There are other things that I would like to do with my life at this point. Yes,
it just shows the big level of these corporations, and
yes,
that's also mirrored in this next story that we're going to look at in relation to Google. So there's a Google competition investigation. So the CMA the UK Competition Markets Authority is launching an inquiry into Google's search engine using additional powers which came into force because the search is vital for economic growth, and it's critical that competition is working correctly. So the likes of Bing and what have you can have their search used. I don't know. I mean, Google is such a household name at this point. If you said, I'm going to go and look something up, what do you say? You say, I'm going to Google it, don't you? So
you don't say I'm going to Bing that, and I'll get back to you. Indeed, is anyone out there using Bing? If you are, let us know. Get in touch, please do. And you know what? We might even offer a prize for the first person who gets in touch with us and says, I use Bing, and provides me with verifiable evidence of that.
So here again, we're looking at a massive corporation. Yes, it's going to be investigated. Yes, the CMA have got new powers. But are they really going to be able to enforce anything that's going to really hurt Google? Probably not, no.
So this is the UK's equivalent of the Digital Markets Act, which is what's coming in Europe and is allowing Europe to sort of investigate and then come up with potentially massive fines. I believe that under this legislation, it gives them the power to fine based on percentage of global turnover. So they could turn around and say, well, actually, your turnover is $3.5 billion, and therefore we will fine you 5% of that. that would be a lot.
Yeah.
That's the sort of stuff that governments can plug deficits with. That. I mean, yeah, it's incredible when you look at it. And obviously, I'm talking there the 3.5, the 3 trillion turnover we're talking about there, the valuation of Apple, not its turnover. So this is based on percentage turnover, which we're still turning about turnovers in the range of tens, hundreds of billions. But in this instance, it's then the Digital Markets Desk at the CMA saying, yeah, we're going to look at Google. Google's then saying, we will play along and we will comply with the terms of this investigation, because you think, yeah, the resources of Google will be 10, 20 times greater than the UK regulators.
Surprised you left it at just 10 or 20 times greater.
I mean, literally, Google's lawyers will just be able to bury the CMA in just huge amounts of information they could disclose in terms of internal records, governance, policies, minutes of meetings, discussions, memos, email. I mean, they could just, as I say, flatten them, bury them, just under the sheer weight of information they would then have to look through to try and comprehend, let alone understand before then reaching any form of working decision. And then, of course, if the regulator says, well, it's our decision that having looked at things, we're going to find them this. And then Google says, you didn't understand what we disclosed, therefore we're going to contest this.
And then got the full appeals process and all of that jazz.
Yeah, I mean, we aren't talking about like in the US, where if a regulator is going to bring about enforcement, they actually have to go to court for it. In this, we're just looking at monetary penalty notices and decisions. But still, there is a process that has to be followed. And then you could potentially, someone like Google could then turn around and say, well, we'll judicially review that decision.
Yeah.
A lot of corporations will go, well, we don't want to get engaged in judicial review, but Google, they can just spin this out. They really can.
So the chance of really anything coming of this, somewhat small, but nonetheless, the CMA are trying to wave the red flag at the bull.
I shouldn't be sceptical this early on, but I'm afraid I just can't help it on that one.
Moving on to our next story, we've got healthcare workers being targeted by a cyber attack. So the police have launched an investigation into allegations that hackers are selling the personal details of foreign nationals working in the healthcare sector. In a post a couple of weeks ago, in a hacking forum, a user claimed to have breached the Home Office's UK visas and immigration database and gained access to the personal information of more than 171 foreign nationals working in the industry in the UK. The data allegedly include documents such as passports, work permits, UK visas, and bank statements. So the user also claimed that there was a potential for ongoing access to the database as it appears to be periodically updated. So this is quite interesting. So the police investigation has been launched, and a spokesperson for the department refused to comment on whether the hackers still had access to the database. There's a lot to unpack here. I mean, firstly, you've got hackers targeting British critical infrastructure again. Yeah. And this is a trend that we've seen gaining more popularity in the last couple of years, where we've had a lot of critical infrastructure that has been targeted, namely the healthcare sector, because unfortunately the healthcare sector operates off a lot of legacy systems. And that is where a lot of problems lie. When you've got a lot of mismatchy kind of cloud devices and all of the in-between, there are cracks. And these cracks can be exploited and clearly are being exploited.
Yes. So, I mean, first of all, it's interesting there that they've said, oh, we can't confirm or deny if the hackers have ongoing access to this. That tells you that they did have access, that they did get into this system, which you look at the sheer volume of information that has to be collected when it comes to immigration and nationality. Given that my wife had to go through the immigration process, and that was a good 15 years ago now, and it was labyrinthine then, putting together lever arch files full of information, bank statements and health records and signed statements and this and that. So it will only have got increasingly complex in the period since then. The idea of that information being then hacked and seemingly sifted through with a significant degree of ability to search with a total degree of accuracy and control by these hackers is a significant concern.
And let's not forget that this is a breach of the Home Office's UK visa and immigration database. So this is not just, NHS Trust Charity where you've got HR and it's got all this information.
Yeah.
No. We're talking about the Home Office. And, again, government organisation, probably a lot of legacy systems, but we are talking about quite a big body here.
Handling hundreds of thousands of applications every year. Well, millions, in fact. I mean, net migration to the UK last year was about 700,000, but that means you've got, so many million coming in, so many million going out, which gets you that net figure of, the population is so many 100,000 more than it was a year ago.
Yeah.
So it's an incredibly busy, incredibly intensive department with huge volumes of sensitive personal data on individuals, covering everything from their histories, previous employers, political opinions, religious beliefs, medical treatment. And in this instance, that information is sufficiently detailed to have allowed the hackers to go, well, we want this particular cohort, those who are foreign nationals working within the NHS. They're able to sift down to that level. The other interesting thing in that article as well is where it says apparently the security minister has said that millions of pounds has been paid out on ransomware ransoms when hackers have locked data of government departments and agencies and then demanded a ransom to get in there.
And you know what you say, don't feed the beast.
Well, the scary thing on that is that that's going against the recommendation from the UK's own regulators on this. The ICO, the National Cyber Security Centre, both say don't pay ransoms. They both did a joint letter to, I think, the Law Society and the SRO a couple of years ago saying, please, will you get your lawyer members to stop advising clients to pay ransoms? Yet, what does the British government, in terms of its agencies and departments, do? When faced with a ransom, it paid it. I don't think I need to say any more at that point.
No. We're going to be ending the podcast on a bit of a warning here. So, nice and uplifting. So this is looking at the Action Fraud Alert. So insight from Action Fraud reports suggest that individuals were defrauded after receiving unexpected messages and emails from Booking.com belonging to a hotel they had a reservation with, which had then been taken over by a criminal. Using this account, the criminal sends an in-app message, email, or WhatsApp message to customers, deceiving them into making payments or requesting credit card details. So the specific account takeovers are likely to be a result of targeted phishing attacks against a hotel or accommodation provider, and not Booking.com's backend or infrastructure, which in of itself is interesting that they've added that in there, because we have reported before the kind of problems that these sites may have. But this is just another interesting way that people are being defrauded and they are being targeted, and in some pretty, out there ways. Targeted phishing attacks against the hotel or the accommodation provider. You're looking quite deep in there to be able to do this, and people are falling for it. So between June 23 and September 2024, Action Fraud received 532 reports from individuals with a total of £370,000 lost in this sort of scam. And I think it's just, providing you guys with a warning, the fact that this does happen, it can happen, and the steps that you need to take in terms of making sure that it is a legitimate request. And if in doubt, the classic pick up the phone and give someone a ring is always good. And I say that when that means going on to a well-known, recognisable website, making sure that it is in fact the correct website and getting the correct number.
So back in the olden days, when you wanted to book a holiday, you used to go along to a travel agent and speak to a travel agent who would then take you through the different options, show you some glossy brochures, and then you go, I'll have that one, please. And you then get that the agent would handle everything. There is something called the Association of British Travel Agents, and if a travel agent was in the Association of British Travel Agents, and then there was a problem with your flight or your hotel or your holiday as a whole, guess what?
It was them that had to fix it.
You'd get your money back, guaranteed.
That's
because it was ABTA. Now, fast forward, where do we find ourselves now? You have these Leviathan booking sites like the well-known Booking.com, which is so well known it now has its annual, very repetitive advert on TV and radio, and is being repeated ad nauseum, ad infinitum, because of course January is when people book their holidays. The interesting thing is that the hackers know that January is when you've got the reductions on the flights and the hotels and the villas, and that this is when you've got the maximum amount of traffic after Christmas and New Year, when people are making their plans for the year, and when you're going to have the highest yield for then trying to send out your phishing emails and potentially getting someone to click on it, because they'll think, yes, I have just used Booking.com, and therefore you receive what you think is a genuine text or email, and you go, oh yes, hey, that's about the booking that I've just made. Click on it, and then you go, and who knows what will happen.
And it kind of goes back to that kind of line, as if it's too good to be true, it probably is. And also just kind of using a bit of common sense. Like if they're asking for personal details, such as your credit card, over a message, maybe try the old-fashioned picking up the phone.
Yes, though this is where actually I have so much sympathy for those who do find themselves in this situation, because it's the way now that sort of so many corporations, and I don't know if Booking.com or Airbnb, I've not thankfully had to be in the position of trying to use their customer service, but very often you've got to either be on a phone for so long, and then you'll have sort of automated questions, and you have to go to great lengths to actually get through to a human being, which can just put you off anyway. But sometimes that's your only recourse is to do that. But bear in mind, as you say, that you're never going to get contacted and in theory asked to enter that information, and always be very then skeptical about sort of links that you receive via SMS, text, or an email that doesn't look as though it might have the it might be branded to an extent, but just ask yourself, can I be sure that this actually relates to the inquiry or the reservation that I've made, and take it from there. Because otherwise it is so easy to find yourself being taken advantage of. And I mean, bear in mind as well. Let's try. I'll try and end on a slightly more uplifting note. Well, it was quite amusing. It probably shouldn't be, but bear in mind the story recently of the Waymo chap in a Waymo who was trying to go to an airport, and he booked the Waymo to take him to the airport to go away for Christmas. The Waymo arrived. This is a driverless taxi in, I believe, California, and gets in the Waymo, and that takes him towards the airport, and it arrives at the terminal, and he wants to get out, and the Waymo doesn't stop. And then it keeps going, and it goes around the airport, and then it comes back to the terminal. He's like, I'm going to get out now, and he can't, because the vehicle doesn't stop moving. And then he's like, well, what do I do? And you open the app, and you're pressing buttons, and you've got to jump through all these hoops to try and eventually get through to a human being. Because, of course, it's not going to say, automated, when you're going through automated questions on app, it's not going to say, help, my Waymo will not stop. I mean, so that's where you do need to speak to a human being and go, help, I'm in a machine that won't stop, and what do I do?
Trap, let me out.
Yeah, exactly. So whether this poor man actually made his flight or not, I don't know, but it does kind of flag up the concern about the fact that some of these systems are already being sort of thrust out onto the public, and sometimes aren't entirely 100% foolproof. But it also typifies the fact that, the systems in place when it comes to your customer service and your inquiry and your help, what do I do here, can sometimes be pretty onerous. So if you don't want to find yourself spending hours on the phone to whoever your customer services are, that's a reason to think very, very carefully about every email and every text that you receive that purports to come from whoever it is that you've just done the booking with.
And if nothing else, if you take away from this podcast today, is just that, these things do happen. Awareness in of itself is also just a useful tool to have, particularly when you are booking holidays. And Booking.com is not the only kind of booking conglomerate that will have these problems. So it's just raising the awareness that this does happen, and if you do have a dodgy text, recognizing it's a dodgy text and knowing what to do.
Yeah. And I think ABTA is still a thing, Association of British Travel Agents. So if you are ever sort of making your booking, if you're doing it through a travel agent that is accredited in that way, at least in theory, you still have that level of cover in case anything goes wrong. Whether that would extend to all and any type of cyber attack and misinformation, you'd have to test that theory, but at least you might know that you've got that safety net, which you aren't going to get if it's just a good offer that you've seen on social media or whatever and clicked on it, and who knows who you're actually making that reservation through.
On that uplifting note, that was our last discussion of the episode. And if you have any questions about what we've talked about today, please email us at admin@digitallawuk.com. A summary of today's stories are available on our website, as well as the links to the original stories containing more information. And if you'd like to hear more from us, including information about subscriber-only podcasts, webinars, and events, then please subscribe to Premium via our Patreon channel using the link in the show notes. A big thank you to Answer and Evaluate for helping to produce this podcast. And if you're interested to hear more about Answer and Evaluate services, please take a look at their website that you can find at www.answerandevaluate.com. Just a reminder, these episodes are available on our website, YouTube channel, podcast channels such as Spotify, Apple Music, Google Podcasts, Amazon, and essentially anywhere you can find your podcasts. And please feel free to leave us a review. Thank you for listening, and we hope to see you again next week.